Last week, we covered the Nichols bombshell statement, the one where they said they reported suspected of their daughter and ended up excommunicated for it. Today, St. Andrew's Chapel has responded. And if you thought this story couldn't get more complicated, it just did. The session has released a detailed letter to its congregation, offering their version of the events leading to the excommunication. It contradicts the Nichols on several key points. It defends Stephen Adams, and it raises new questions about what both sides knew and when. We are going to walk through what their statement says, what it omits, and why this story is far from over. Let's get into it. Quick recap for anyone just joining us. Dr. Stephen Nichols, or outgoing president of Reformation Bible College and former chief academic officer at Ligonier Ministries, and his wife, Dr. Heidi Nichols, were excommunicated by St. Andrew's Chapel on March 10, 2026. In their public statement, the Nichols said they reported a suspicion of SA of their daughter Grace by former youth minister Stephen Adams, and that SAC's response was to eventually indict them on charges of slander, unresolved anger, collusion to deceive, failure to follow session directives, and breach of membership vows. They were never tried. They were never found guilty on the underlying charges. They were excommunicated for contumacy, refusing to appear before a session they say they were no longer members of. That is the Nichols account. Now, here is what St. Andrew's Chapel says happened. And I have the full SAC statement. It will be linked in the description below so you can read it for yourself. Let me walk you through what they are actually claiming, point by point. On Stephen Adams and the allegations, SAC says it was Adams himself who first brought the situation to the elders and to law enforcement, not the Nichols. They say that during early meetings with the Nichols, there was no indication whatsoever that their concerns were sensual in nature. The specific allegation, they say, only emerged in early 2025. On the DCF report, SAC acknowledges that the Nichols counselor filed a mandatory report with the Florida Department of Children and Families. But they say DCF determined the information did not meet the legal threshold for a reportable incident of SA and did not open an investigation. And they add that no specific incident was ever provided to the church either. No act, no date, no location. On what they did in response. Despite the lack of a specific allegation, SAC says they still temporarily removed Adams from all ministry roles involving minors for 6 weeks, sought outside expert advice, and consulted a local denominational committee. When the Nichols refused to provide further evidence and law enforcement confirmed they had no grounds to investigate, they allowed Adams to resume his role. Adams later resigned voluntarily. On the excommunication, SAC flatly denies that the discipline was retaliation for the Nichols raising concerns. They say the proceedings were launched in response to over a year of documented disruptive conduct, public confrontations, anonymous social media attacks, and escalating accusations without evidence. The excommunication itself, they reiterate, was not for the underlying charges, but for contumacy, the willful refusal to engage with the proceedings. On the PCA committee, SAC notes that a denominational committee reviewed the matter in late 2025 and found no criminal wrongdoing or ecclesiastical offense against Adams. They say they are not aware of any active investigation of any kind involving him. Finally, they close by urging their congregation not to speculate, to pray for all involved, and affirm that they remain open to restoration if the Nichols seek it. That is SAC's account, and it is substantially different from the Nichols account on almost every point that matters. Now that we know what both sides are saying, let me focus on the 3 points where their accounts are most directly in conflict, because they cannot both be right. Point 1. Who reported what and when? The Nichols say they reported suspicion of SA to the church on January 10, 2025. SAC does not dispute that date. But SAC says the Nichols showed no indication of any sensual concern during months of earlier meetings, and that Adams himself was the one who reported the Nichols to leadership and law enforcement first. That is a direct and significant contradiction. Either the Nichols were concealing the nature of their concerns in earlier meetings, or SAC's account of those meetings is incomplete. Point 2. What DCF actually found and why. SAC frames the DCF outcome as a clean non-finding. The information didn't meet the legal threshold, no investigation was opened. But the Roy's report, which obtained body cam footage from the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, tells a more complicated story. Heidi Nichols told a deputy, she's not willing to talk, and she's fragile. Since then, she has closed up, unwilling to talk. The reason the investigation stalled was not that authorities found nothing credible. It was that the person at the center of it was unwilling or unable to speak. Those are materially different things, and SAC's statement does not acknowledge that distinction. Point 3. Was the discipline retaliation? The Nichols say the indictments came 2 days after they announced they were leaving, and that the sequence is itself the answer. SAC says the indictments followed over a year of documented disruptive conduct, confrontations, anonymous social media attacks, harassment. They say they have documentation. We have not seen it. Until it is produced, both accounts remain in dispute. Here is where I have to be very direct with you, because there is investigative reporting from the Roy's report that goes beyond what either party's statement fully discloses. SAC's statement says the PCA committee did not establish any criminal wrongdoing or ecclesiastical offense against Adams. That is technically accurate. But it is not the full story of what that committee found. According to reporting by the Roy's report, when PCA committee members interviewed Stephen Adams, they asked him about multiple instances of being naked around youth group boys. He claimed not to remember any of them. The committee noted in their final report, in January 2026, that they did not believe Adams was being truthful. The committee member who spoke to the Roy's report, Andrew Augenstein, a PCA elder, said of Adams' conduct, "In my church, I would have fired him." Maybe you could see it as a gray area, but it was definitely a violation of human resources and risk management policies. The reason the inquiry did not result in chargeable offenses was not that investigators were satisfied. It was because the men involved did not want to make public statements about what happened to them. SAC's statement says, the information before it did not establish any criminal wrongdoing or ecclesiastical offense. That is the conclusion. What it omits is the process, and what the investigators actually found and believed about Adams' credibility. That is a significant omission. Yes, AC says DCF determined the information did not meet the legal criteria for a reportable incident. But here is what the Roy's report's investigation actually found about why state authorities couldn't move forward. Body cam footage from the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, obtained by TRR, captured Heidi Nichols saying, "She's not willing to talk, and she's fragile." Since then, she has closed up, unwilling to talk. Grace Nichols, the daughter at the center of all of this, was not cooperating with investigators. Not because there was nothing to report, but because, according to her mother, she had shut down. If you have ever worked with survivors of trauma, or simply read about how survivors respond to SA, this pattern is not unfamiliar. Trauma frequently produces silence. Silence does not equal fabrication. I am not saying what happened. The investigation did not produce charges. But the reason the investigation stalled is materially different from the reason SAC's statement implies. There is a difference between DCF found nothing and DCF couldn't investigate because the victim wouldn't speak. Interestingly, the Nichols are not the only people St. Andrew's Chapel has excommunicated in recent months for contumacy after they left the church. Former ruling elder David Zima, the same elder who compiled a report on pastoral compensation at SAC and raised questions about financial transparency, was also excommunicated on March 12th, the same day the Nichols letter was sent to the congregation. Like the Nichols, Zima had resigned his SAC membership when the church left the PCA and joined a PCA congregation. The elders of Northside Presbyterian in Melbourne, where Zima is now a member in good standing, sent a formal letter to St. Andrew's Chapel telling them their jurisdiction over Zima ended the moment they left the PCA. They called the proceedings null and void. They told SAC to cease and desist. They have given Zima their full support to pursue civil remedies. 3 people. All left SAC when it departed the PCA. All joined PCA congregations. All excommunicated for refusing to submit to a session they no longer belong to. Whether you believe the Nichols account or SAC's account on the SA question, the pattern of discipline directed at people who left after SAC abandoned the denomination is something no thoughtful observer should ignore. Let me tell you what we still do not know, because intellectual honesty requires saying this clearly. We do not know the full truth of what happened between Grace Nichols and Stephen Adams. Adams has categorically denied every allegation. No criminal charges have been filed. The PCA committee did not find chargeable offenses. We do not know the full nature of the Nichols' conduct toward Adams. SAC says there were public confrontations, anonymous social media activity, and harassment over more than a year. They say they have documentation. We have not seen it. We do not know why it took a full year. From the counselor's DCF report in early 2024 to the Nichols report to the church in January 2025, for the SA allegation to be formally raised with church leadership. Protestia has noted this gap, and it is a fair question. But what we do know is this. The PCA committee that investigated Adams found behavior they considered a clear violation of professional policy, found him not credible in his denials, and chose not to charge him only because witnesses declined to go public. That finding, which SAC's own statement references obliquely, deserves to be stated plainly and openly. Every institution in this story has now released a public statement. The Nicholls have spoken. St. Andrew's Chapel has responded. The Roy's report has published independent investigative findings that neither party is fully reckoning with publicly. And at the center of all of it is a young woman named Grace Nichols, whose counselor filed a mandatory report with the state of Florida in 2024, and who, by her mother's account, has since shut down and is unwilling to speak. That is where the heart of this story is. And whatever you believe about church polity, about contumacy, about who said what on social media, that young woman and her family deserve to be prayed for. Sincerely, genuinely, without any of the noise, we will continue to follow this story as it develops. The Roy's report link is in the description. Their investigative reporting on this story has been careful and thorough, and I recommend reading it in full. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and as always, more to come.